Well, we've got this very, very narrow path, if you like, careful balance between, on the one hand, obviously inflation is well above target, and our job is to bring it back down to target and achieve price, to bring it back to where it must be. On the other hand, we've got a very big, predominantly external shock, or series of shocks, hitting the economy, hitting the real income of households, companies in this country.
And it's kind of historic stuff, really, isn't it?
It is. It is. And we've also got a very tight labour market in this country. I go around the country a lot, talk to businesses, and they're talking, their worry is how do I recruit enough people for my business? So we're trying to balance this. We think most of the work to bring inflation down will be done by, unfortunately, the severity and scale of this shock to real incomes, which I have to, I'm afraid to say, has got worse in the last 3 months since we last produced a report, because obviously of the impact of the terrible events in Ukraine.
And the scale of what's facing households at the moment, what's your advice to many people who are just trying to make ends meet right now? It is really difficult at the moment. Yeah, is it going to get worse?
Well, we do think that inflation is going to get somewhat higher as the year goes by. The reason I'm afraid that have a reasonably high probability of that happening is the way in which the domestic energy price setting mechanism operates. We're into the window now of data that are collected to reset it in the autumn. And prices were high, even higher during the early part of the window, because I think really during the initial period of the Russian invasion. It's come down a bit since then, but they're still higher. So unfortunately, at the moment, as things stand, and as we're forecasting, we have to look at higher energy prices at the end of this year. Now, you ask, why are we raising interest rates today? And we were very careful, and it's a very, very difficult balance we're striking. But there are risks from the tightness of the labour market, the encouraging signs of activity that we saw earlier in the year. One of the good pieces of news is that the effect of Omicron was we didn't think it was going to have a big effect, and it had even less effect, actually, than we thought it was. So we have to balance that, because there are risks to a further increase in inflation, particularly coming from just the sheer tightness of the labour market. Unemployment is at 3.8%. Now, of course, that's a very good news story in many ways. But of course, it does create a very tight labour market, and that's a risk to inflation. So we're trying to walk this very narrow path and strike this balance.
But bluntly, you are making life tougher for families right now, aren't you?
Well, what would make it even tougher for families is if inflation kept on rising even more. I have to be honest about that.
That's a risk.
That is a risk, and that would be even tougher. So we have to take that into consideration.
And right now you're already talking about inflation getting up to over 10%, the highest level since the early 80s. Yes. As the governor, it's your job to try and keep it close to 2%. How does that feel, seeing it sky high?
It's extremely uncomfortable. I don't want to make any bones about it. But the fact of the matter is this: we are being struck by historically large shocks. Let's face it. Who of us thought there would be a war in Europe of the sort that we're seeing? It's terrible.
Do you think, is there anyone, a lot of people are suffering economically, talking about economically, a lot of people are suffering right now. Is there anyone who is benefiting at the moment?
Well, I don't think it's right to think about benefits, because, of course, inflation hits everybody. What I worry about is...
But there's a distribution, money.
There's a distribution. And what is, I think, important that we bear in mind here is the particular nature of the inflation we're having at the moment, because it's most concentrated in energy, food, quite a bit of a number of food-related food goods. And when you look at the consumption patterns of people and you divide it up into income groups, because energy and food they're core for all of us. We all have to consume them. You find that the lower income groups relatively consume more of those things, because they relatively consume less of the non-essentials. And the thing that worries me and concerns me is that, of course, therefore, relatively speaking, it hits the least well off, those with least bargaining power in the labour market, the hardest.
So this could be bad for inequality, for the gaps between haves and have-nots?
I think we have to be very, very.
And is there anything the
very
bank can do about that at the moment?
Well, the best thing the bank can do, obviously, is do everything we can, which we are doing, is to get inflation back down again, to take care of this issue.
Okay, all right, Governor, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Ed.